Howdy guys, welcome back to the Land Talk Podcast. We're here on episode number 6. Today we're going to talk about subdividing. So I've still got my land agent Justin here. He's got a lot of experience on surveying, so I want to get all of his knowledge as far as how to subdivide something. So Justin, if you own some land and you want to go cut it up, kind of give me the big idea and then kind of narrow it down to the process here.
Okay, it sounds like a great thing to do, and it can be, but you need to have time and money to do it correctly. You can make a lot of money, but it costs money to get there. You'll have to go through and abide by the city and the county ordinances for land development. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is have a pre-development meeting with the city, if you're in the city, or the county, if you're in the county, and find out what they're going to require in order to allow this proposed subdivision to happen. So what configuration do you want the lots? Is there any floodplain out there? If there is, are they going to require a flood study? If a flood study is required, what type of surveying is required to facilitate that flood study? Are you going to be on city sewer? If you're going to be on septic, do you have a sanitarian that's going to do septic site plans and soils tests and so forth? There's a litany of things that they could require, and many of them seem redundant, but they're going to require them anyway, and you can try and fight it, but you're not going to win. So you're going to have the funds and the resources in order to get that plat pushed all the way through. In many cases, you're going to have to notify contiguous landowners of your intent to subdivide. You're going to have to post signs on the property informing the public of your intent to subdivide. You're going to have to post ads in the newspaper informing the public of your intent to subdivide. So a lot of different moving parts. And if you get a good surveyor, and depending on the number of lots you're going to make, if you get a good engineer, they can kind of run all that through and do it for you, so that you're going to have a process that's as smooth as possible to get it done.
Yeah, and that kind of varies from county to county, right? So I know there's some that are more strict and some that are more lax. Is that right?
Yeah, there are some counties, more rural counties, that are more lax, and some counties that are larger. Like, for example, Travis County has tons of regulations when it comes to platting, and get out. Maybe Milam County or Lee County has less restrictions.
Right, and they may even tell you if you're going to subdivide a property. Let's say you're going to build a road into the property. I know we're running into a lot of used to we could have gravel roads here, and the county may accept those if it met their qualifications. But I know now, like even here, they're changing it to where now it has to be chip sealed. So we're kind of even the lax counties with time. Well, I think we'll move a little more stricter, but.
Everything is moving towards more regulations in a lot of counties. Let's say Bastrop County, Caldwell County, Hayes County. You're going to have to if you're building lots that are not going to front onto a public right-of-way, you're going to have to build a road that's engineered to county specs with curb and gutter and turnarounds for emergency vehicles and the appropriate number of entrances and exits. There's a lot of moving parts. So you may think, well, I'm just taking a property and I'm going to split it into 2. Well, you can split that 5 acres into 2.5 acre lots. That's fine, but the road's going to cost you $500,000 to do it. And is that financially feasible when you're going to sell each lot for X amount of dollars? And that's what you have to kind of figure out.
Right. So being that the rules are kind of different in each county, aren't there some exemptions to these rules as well? Do you know?
There are exemptions to platting, and they vary by county. For example, there's exemption to platting for financing purposes in certain counties. Bastrop County and Hayes County will allow it as of now. Caldwell County will not allow it as of now. And so what I mean for financing purposes, let's say you have 100 acres and you want to buy a mobile home and you want to use your land as a down payment on that mobile home. You do not want to put up 100 acres of land for a down payment on one mobile home. So you'll cut out 1 acre of land as a down payment on that mobile home. That way, if you don't make your payments on the mobile home, the bank can repossess that 1 acre of land. Well, you can be exempt from platting in certain counties for that purpose. However, it has to meet the minimum criteria for platting. That way, if you ever default on your loan, the bank would be able to plat that property if they ever sold it to the public. There's also exemptions for family. If you're gifting or selling land to a family member within the 3rd degree of consanguinity, so grandparent to grandchild, parent to child, cousins don't generally count. But, depending on the county, you'd be able to do that. The caveat is you cannot sell the land outside of the family for a set period of time. If you ever do, it may be subject to the platting requirements of the county. So it's much cheaper and less time consuming to do a family partition. However, you're not going to become a land developer and sell that to the public. You're not going to skirt the regulations, in other words.
Right. So in talking about exemptions from the subdivision rules, what do you see on like larger tracts? Let's say somebody wanted to cut 100 acres into 50 acres or 100 acres into 10-acre tracts or something. What about big properties? Do those come into play?
Sure. So that is a lot easier to do than a plat. So when you have land and in both the parent tract and the subsequent tracts that you're going to cut out are greater in size than 10.01 acres, and you're not constructing roads, you can cut out those tracts by meets and bounds. When you do that, it depends on the county. Some counties require express permission from the county engineer for an exemption. Other counties, you can just do it, file the deed, and there's no problem. So you got to check with the county on that. But you can hire a surveyor, cut it up by meets and bounds, have them make an exhibit map and write a description, and then you're off to the races. You don't have to get all the other approvals that you would need for a plat.
Right. So since we deal with land more than lots in town, like what's the process on platting? Who does that ultimately go to, and who approves it, and how does that work?
So if you're in the county, you're going to have to go in front of county commissioners, in front of commissioners court, and get those approvals. The public has a chance to stand up and voice their opinion for or against your proposed subdivision. And the bottom line, though, is as long as you meet the minimum standards set forth by the state, you're going to be able to cut your property up. But that doesn't mean it's going to be cheap. It just means you can do it.
Right. Do they call it like ministerial? Is that a word that you hear all the time? So what I've heard is ministerial is like, I don't get the right to tell you yes or no based on my opinion. If you meet the minimum qualifications, we have to let you do it.
You have to do it. Because that would make sense.
Because it's, the rules are set that way. But so if you're going to cut up a property, and it doesn't matter what it's for, whether it's splitting between family members, I think subdividing kind of gets a bad rap when sometimes it's just a family partitioning their property between siblings or whatever. So, obviously you're going to want to get a survey of that, right? So you're going to get a survey out there, and what do they typically do when they? Is it just like a normal survey? What do you typically see there?
So you're going to need a survey, and the first thing is the surveyor would have to survey the parent property or the existing tract, show what those boundaries are and what you have, and then survey each individual piece, set new monumentation for those new tracts, and if in the case of meets and bounds, write new meets and bounds descriptions of those tracts, and then you can hire a lawyer, draft a deed, and record that deed. Plats, much more goes into a plat. You're going to have easements on there, setbacks on there, different stipulations that are going to have to go into the plat before it can be approved. So a lot more goes into a plat.
Right. So one of the things that we kind of a buzzword we hear on subdivisions a lot of time are flag tracts. And what are flag tracts? So
a flag tract or a flag lot is a lot where there's a narrow piece that runs off of the public right-of-way, and that's the flagpole, and then it opens up into a larger piece of land in the back. Now, different counties have different regulations on flag tracts. For example, Caldwell County will allow up to a certain number of flag tracts per total number of lots, but the flagpole portions of those tracts cannot touch each other, right? So you can have a flag on one end of a development, and if you have enough lots, you can have a flag on the other end of a development, but you cannot have the flagpoles touching each other. And they do that to negate somebody from coming in and putting in a shared driveway, and then you have problems with who owns that driveway, who's going to maintain that driveway, where's the property line in between.
Yeah, so I've got a story on that. So
okay, great.
I've seen numerous subdivisions here lately, and one of the things I see most of are numerous flag tracks side by side. And in just my personal opinion, I think 2 back to back doesn't really concern me much, but like there's some subdivisions I can think of where they may have 10 of them in a row, and they may have some that are maybe they're 10 foot wide ones. And then they're going to basically dedicate an easement to cover the whole 100 foot, and they're going to build one road down the middle of those, and it gets really complicated. The other thing I've seen is on those narrow flags that are touching each other. The other reason that I've heard that they do this is because they want to give each party use of a common road. That's the goal, is to give them a narrow strip, make an easement. But then also, I've seen people give like deeded 1 foot strips for water lines, and you'll have numerous little 1 foot strips or 2 foot strips just for a water line. And that's kind of going like the bad side of subdividing. Is you get some designs that just aren't very well planned, and I think it leads to a lot of problems, and it kind of makes things worse.
Yeah, people do that obviously to maximize the amount of lots they can get out of a property that may not have a ton of road frontage. But at the same time, it makes it difficult down the road.
So, but flag tracks really, I mean, the point they're trying to get is they're trying to manage depth, right? Is that kind of the whole reason for the flag track?
Length to width ratios, and they're trying to make sure that each property has direct access to that public right-of-way, and you're not accessing properties through easements. That everybody's going to have their own access.
And really, it's kind of a way to make each property wider, and that way you don't have properties side by side that are really narrow. You can, if you do flag tracks, you can have wider lots set on top of each other, and you're going to get a wider property. And that's kind of the whole reason for flag tracks. But kind of back to subdividing a little bit, what are some of the tax implications of doing subdivision? And I mean, we're not tax guys. I don't want to go too in depth here, but what are some of the ramifications of doing subdivisions?
Right. Well, it really varies. If the property that you're going to subdivide has an ag exemption on it currently, and you're taking 100 acres and you're going to be making small lots out of it, the developer or whoever changes the use of the land has to pay rollback taxes. And that's the difference between the ag valuation of the land and the new valuation of the land for a set number of years prior to the sale. And so that can be not an insignificant number if you're making a lot of parcels and you are only paying $50 or $100 a year on the entire property for taxes.
So on rollback taxes, who typically pays those? Is that the guy that's the end user or the developer? It's
the person who changes the use of the property, so that would be the developer in most cases.
Right, and that's kind of a good thing. I mean, at least in that sense, the end user is not required to pay. It's the guy who's arguably trying to make money here. So you see that a lot. But on subdivisions, what about restrictions? I mean, I feel like that's kind of a buzzword when you're buying something that's subdivided. What are deed restrictions?
So that's an important topic because there can be restrictions against subdividing property. So you got to check that out before you subdivide your property. Once you subdivide your property, the developer can put in seller-imposed deed restrictions that can limit the type of home that's there, the type of use for the land, so no commercial businesses, no hog farms, that kind of stuff.
So one of the things we see a lot on deed restrictions actually is like, obviously you mentioned, houses you can build, requirements you need for those, but oddly enough, we see some on like restricted uses, like, you can't hunt. And I know that's a big thing for a lot of our buyers, but it's kind of crazy to see properties where you can't hunt and do other things. Some businesses, you'll see stuff that doesn't allow churches. So every property is a little different, and I feel like as you subdivide a property, these it kind of comes hand in hand to where you can almost assume if it was subdivided, there's probably deed restrictions. So I feel like deed restrictions gets kind of a negative stigma attached to it, but actually deed restrictions can be good too. What do you think on good deed restrictions?
I think reasonable deed restrictions can be good because it maintains the upkeep of a development. It really depends. Are we talking about a subdivision with quarter-acre lots or a subdivision with 10, 20, 30-acre lots? So it really depends, and that can kind of dictate what the restrictions are and how they're enforced. Deed restrictions really in the end can only be enforced by property owners associations or neighbors that want to sue you over not abiding by restrictions, and that's pretty much the two ways.
Yeah, and the grantor could do it. So the guy who put the restrictions.
Yeah, the guy could, but in a lot of cases that guy's long gone.
Right.
Most by the time anybody cares about.
So I feel like some deed restrictions can be good, but I think it all depends on how they're structured, and it's kind of one of those things to where I don't like being told what to do. Like most people don't, right? But I kind of like my neighbor being told what to do. So the good thing about deed restrictions, it can really help stop junk and trash and numerous mobile homes and dog kennels and some of the big bad things. So, I tend to think that, the reasonable restrictions are really good because I think it kind of keeps the areas nicer, and you don't get these just kind of slummed, places that aren't very desirable anymore. What about mineral rights? So I feel like on a lot of subdivided properties, minerals, we have a lot of buyers asking, do you get minerals or water rights? What do you usually see there?
Generally, if it's subdivided, you're probably not going to get them unless it's explicitly listed that you have them. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, kind of like if you can assume that subdivision has deed restrictions, I could also assume that subdivision probably doesn't come with mineral or water rights. The developer's generally going to want to keep those. And who knows, there may not have been any mineral rights left when he bought the property, but I think a lot of times it kind of goes hand in hand and you're not going to get those because if there is any left, the developer usually is going to keep those.
And when you say water rights, you can still drill a personal well out on your own property. You just can't sell that water.
Right. That just kind of stops your commercial ability to sell water or lease water. You're probably more likely to lease it. But we're going to do a whole episode on water rights too. But yeah, you should always inherently have the right to drill on a water well for your own uses, for your personal uses. But not getting water rights in a subdivision for this instance, it would just restrict you from leasing or selling that water up. So. But I feel like, subdividing and developers in general kind of have a bad stigma sometimes. What are some bad things that you've heard, and kind of what are some rules coming into play to make sure that when land's subdivided, that the end user's kind of getting what they're paying for, whether that be utilities and that sort of stuff?
Well, in general now, most plats are going to require the utility providers to sign off on those plats. So when you're subdividing land, you're going to need to put a bond up for the water and roadways if you don't install them prior to the plat being recorded. And there's already going to be an agreement in place, so you're not going to just have a development that doesn't have access to those utilities.
Right, and especially on water, I've heard lately, I think used to, you could sell properties without water because you could argue, hey, you have groundwater, you can drill a water well, but kind of what are they doing going forward to make sure that water's kind of more guaranteed or predictable?
So in order to get water on a proposed development, you're almost always going to have a water feasibility study performed by the water company and their engineer. And it's going to tell you what the capacity is for the line that's in the area, if you have to upgrade a line, and then how many meters you can get off of that line. And in a lot of cases now, water is sparse, so those studies are taking 8 months to a year in some cases to get back.
Right. What about groundwater, like for water wells?
For water wells, generally the lot size for platted lots needs to be larger for water wells. And then also, if you're using wells in a subdivision, depending on the county, you'll have to drill 2 wells on the property and pump water out of one and check the water table in the other and have a water study done with those wells, and that will denote how many wells you can have and how many lots you can have if you're not going to be doing shared wells.
Right. So kind of to sum things up, you and I both deal with subdivisions quite often as far as partitioning bigger parent tracts into smaller ones, but kind of how does a land agent come into play there? What's their role? And kind of why is it important to use a land agent as kind of a way to spearhead that process.
Yeah, so you're going to want a land agent, first of all, to help you buy a property that's going to be subdividable, if that's your goal. And then you're going to need a land agent to help you with the configuration of that in conjunction with the surveyor and engineer. And then you're going to need a land agent who knows how to market a property that has been subdivided, showing all the different lots. And because when you go out there, it takes some imagination to know what you're buying when you just walk into a big field, but there's 30 lots out there, but you just don't know it. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things we've had to do over the years is where we're actually doing kind of exempt subdivisions, a lot of them over 10 acres, but a lot of times, those tracts aren't surveyed before we sell them. And so they're kind of a la carte. If you want to buy, we know we have to sell over 10 acres, but if somebody wanted to come in and buy 17 acres, I think that's kind of one of the cooler things of subdividing is where you can kind of carve a piece of property the way you want it, if you have enough room, of course. But so I think it's kind of hard for some agents to kind of picture and compare a plat or even like an aerial map for that matter and kind of transpose that onto the surface of the ground. So that's kind of one of the cool parts that I remember doing is going to figure out exactly how to cut a property, and then once you adjust the size up or down, where does that new line go, and you're using trees for reference or this for reference. But I think that's kind of one of the parts to where a land agent comes kind of in key, because they've got to be able to read a map, and especially on lines that can move, that gets a little more delicate. So all right, guys, that was episode 6, talking about subdividing. Obviously, a lot of details to catch there, but we hope you learned some from it there, and we will catch you on episode 7.